No one heard the clock stop. That was the first thing Detective Elias Crow noticed when the city began to unravel. In a place where everything made noise, sirens, headlines, speeches, markets opening and closing, there was suddenly a moment where time itself seemed to hesitate. Not break, not collapse, just pause. As if something enormous had shifted its weight somewhere deep beneath the surface, and the ground had not yet decided whether to crack. At 3:11 a.m., a man died in a room that officially did not exist. The building had no address, no signage, no record in municipal archives. It appeared on no zoning map and belonged to no department anyone could name. It was wedged between two federal structures in the capital, a narrow slice of concrete and glass that most people never noticed because they were never meant to look there. Inside that room, the man sat upright in a chair bolted to the floor. His hands were folded, his eyes were open, and his face carried an expression Elias Crow had only seen a handful of times in his career. Recognition. Not fear, not surprise. Recognition. As if, in his final second, the man had understood exactly who was responsible and why nothing would be done about it. By the time Elias Crow was notified, the body had already been labeled non-actionable. The file was sealed before he could touch it. The surveillance footage had been temporarily corrupted, and the autopsy request was denied under a statute so obscure it might as well have been written in invisible ink. Crow read the notice twice, then a third time. He smiled. That was the second thing worth noticing. Because Elias Crow did not smile when he was defeated. He smiled when he was certain someone had just made a mistake. Crow was no longer supposed to be here. That was the quiet agreement the city had made with itself after his name became inconvenient. He had been removed from his unit, reassigned, investigated, cleared, investigated again, and finally left in a position that existed purely so officials could say he still had one. Officially, he worked in records review. Unofficially, he hunted ghosts. Crow had learned long ago that power did not erase evidence. It buried it, and buried things left patterns, pressure marks, empty spaces where something used to be. His job was to feel for those gaps. The dead man's name, what little of it existed, was Malcolm Hale. That alone was strain. Malcolm Hale was not supposed to be anywhere near that building, alive or dead. He was a policy advisor, mid-level on paper, high-level in reality. The kind of man who sat behind leaders during speeches, whispering suggestions that later became laws. Malcolm Hale had been reported overseas 2 days earlier. Crow pulled every thread he could without alerting the system. Travel logs, security clearances, private meeting schedules. Each request triggered quiet resistance, polite delays, missing fields. The system wasn't blocking him outright. It was pretending not to notice him. That meant someone important believed Crow was harmless now. They were wrong. Crow visited the building at night, wearing a borrowed access badge and the expression of a man who belonged anywhere he chose to stand. The guards barely looked at him. Power, he had learned, often made people lazy. If something existed long enough without consequences, it started to feel eternal. The room was empty now, cleaned with surgical precision. Fresh paint, new air filters, even the bolts in the floor had been replaced. But Crow saw what others missed. A faint discoloration where the chair had been. A shallow scratch near the wall, hidden beneath a layer of polish. And something else. A smell. Not decay, not chemicals. Paper. Old paper. Crow followed it to a vent behind the wall panel. Inside, wedged carefully, was a fragment of something torn by hand. Not shredded. Torn, deliberate. It was a corner of a document. On it was a seal Crow recognized instantly. the Executive Oversight Council. The council did not officially exist. It had no charter, no public acknowledgement, no members listed anywhere. Yet Crow had chased its shadow for nearly 10 years. Every case he had ever touched that ended abruptly. Every investigation that collapsed without explanation. Every suspect who walked free despite overwhelming evidence. All of them curved inward, toward the same dark center. The council did not order murders. It authorized inevitabilities. Crow returned to his office and locked the door. He placed the fragment on his desk and stared at it until the city lights outside began to dim with approaching dawn. Malcolm Hale had known something, and someone had decided that knowing was no longer permitted. By noon, the story broke. Not the truth, never the truth. A senior advisor dies overseas due to sudden illness. Tributes followed immediately, statements of grief, flags lowered, photos circulated of Malcolm Hale smiling beside presidents, ministers, judges. Crow watched the coverage without sound. Every channel used the same phrases. Dedicated public servant. Unwavering integrity. Years of loyal service. It was too synchronized. Crow picked up his phone and called the one person who still answered. Jonah Rook. Rook had once been Crow's partner. Brilliant analyst. Quiet. Too honest for his own survival. He had resigned abruptly 3 years earlier and vanished into private consulting, the kind that paid well and asked no questions. "You're alive," Rook said after Crow explained why he was calling. "So are you," Crow replied. "That makes 2 of us they didn't expect." There was a pause. Then Rook said, "You found the room, didn't you?" Crow closed his eyes. That made 3. They met that night in a place where no one listened anymore. A closed subway station beneath the city, sealed after a fire decades earlier. The echoes their distorted sound, making conversations feel like memories rather than facts. Rook looked older, not in years, in weight. "They're accelerating," Rook said without preamble. "Hale wasn't supposed to be touched yet." "Yet," Crow repeated. Rook nodded. Something leaked, not publicly, internally. Someone inside the council broke pattern. Crow leaned against the wall. "You're saying one of them is scared." "No," Rook said quietly. "I'm saying one of them is guilty." That was when Crow felt it again. That pause, that subtle shift in the world's balance. "Who?" Crow asked. Rook shook his head. "I don't know, but I know this. The council isn't a single thing, it's layers, and the top layer is closer than you think." Before Crow could respond, Rook handed him a small drive. "Don't open it at home," Rook said. "Don't open it anywhere with cameras, and when you do open it, understand this." "Understand what?" Rook's voice dropped to almost nothing. "That every time you get close, they will let you see just enough to believe you're winning." Crow took the drive. The next morning, his access badge stopped working. By afternoon, his accounts were frozen. By evening, his name was trending. Not for Malcolm Hale. For an accusation. A woman came forward, anonymous, credible, carefully presented. She claimed Elias Crow had altered evidence in an old case. A case involving a senator who now sat on the Oversight Committee for National Security. The timing was perfect. The evidence airtight. The outrage immediate. Crow watched his own character assassination unfold in real time, layer by layer, polished and professional. This was not revenge. This was containment. He laughed once softly, alone in his apartment. They were doing it again. By nightfall, a warrant was issued. Crow did not wait for the knock. He left through the back stairwell, carrying nothing but the drive and a realization that settled deep in his chest. Malcolm Hale's death was not a warning. It was an invitation. And somewhere above the city, in rooms far more powerful than the one where Hale died, people were watching to see whether Elia's crow would accept it. He did. As Crow disappeared into the night, unseen by cameras that suddenly failed and sensors that quietly rebooted, one truth became unavoidable. This was not a case. It was a war. And the people who controlled the law were already on the other side.